name is Vincent Jones, and I'll be your moderator for this evening's session. We start with some housekeeping as we usually do. Please note that these sessions run as follows. We will introduce our presenter, and then we will open up the session for general questions and answers where you get to interact with our guests. This will be done either by you raising your hand, at which time I will acknowledge you and invite you to ask your question. Or alternatively, you could post a question in the chat and I can address the question to our guest. A reminder that this is a CPD event, that is, it's a continuous professional development event and carries a value of 2 CPD points. Please contact our secretariat to have your CPD information forwarded to you should you wish to claim those points. We also ask that during the session that you may be required to mute any electronic devices so that we don't have any interference. So we have a quite timely and exciting topic lined up for you tonight. And we have what I would like to call a distinguished speaker coming to join us in Mr. Miles Weeks. I'll give Miles his proper introduction in a moment, but I just wanted to update persons to recent events that the Barbados Association of Professional Engineers would have had. Just this past Saturday, we had a successful tour of the Portville sugarcane factory. That we had about 35 odd persons attending that particular event. And we were quite happy for those persons who turned out. They would have gotten the opportunity to gain some appreciation of the inner workings, as it were, of Portville sugarcane factory, and also would have had an opportunity to ask questions and interact on Saturday morning. So a great opportunity, a great tour. We look forward to facilitating other such tours in the near future. So please continue to monitor the various social platforms that we post the information on and keep an eye out for our next tour, which is currently in planning. So without further ado, I would like to introduce this evening's speaker. Mr. Miles Weeks was the Chief Facilities Development Officer for World Cup Barbados, Inc., the local organizing committee for the ICC Men's Cricket World Cup 2007. And in office, he had responsibility for the redevelopment of Kensington Oval and other ancillary facilities necessary to host the 7 games of the tournament that had been allocated to Barbados. Mr. Weeks is an experienced construction professional with many years of practice in various sectors of the built environment. After an initial apprenticeship as a quantity surveying technician, he studied quantity surveying in the United Kingdom and qualified as a chartered quantity surveyor. He transitioned into project and construction management to better utilize his training, experience, and skills for the cost and time-efficient delivery of large projects. He started and managed a project management consultancy firm for 20 years before he retired from project management to focus on dispute resolution within the construction industry, where he continues to be active today. He is a certified adjudicator, an accredited mediator, and a qualified arbitrator in practice across the Southern Caribbean. Mr. Weeks is a member and fellow of both the Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors and the Chartered Institute of Arbitrators. He is also an accredited member of the Center of Effective Dispute Resolution of the United Kingdom. He is an affiliate member of the Barbados Institute of Architects. He was the first president of the Barbados Association of Quantity Surveyors and served a further 5 terms as its president. He was the chairman of the Barbados chapter of the Chartered Institute of Arbitrators and subsequently became chairman of the Caribbean branch of that institute. He is currently their education and training officer with responsibility for facilitating training courses in commercial mediation and international arbitration. So without further ado, I would like to turn the session now over to Mr. Weeks. Miles, over to you.
Thank you, Vincent, for your welcome and introduction. and for the invitation to address the members of the Barbados Association of Professional Engineers and others here in this webinar on the topic of the Kensington Oval redevelopment for Cricket World Cup 2007 and its continued legacy. It has been over 20 years since I became involved in the Kensington Oval redevelopment project, and hopefully my memory of the facts is still sufficiently intact to give you and those attending my project manager's perspectives of the project, its history, scope, timelines, constraints, challenges, successes, and legacy. The redevelopment of Kensington Oval was a pivotal part of Barbados's preparation for the hosting of the ICC, that is the International Cricket Council, Men's Cricket World Cup in 2007. A tournament similar to, but distinct from, the tournament which will be taking place shortly, that being the ICC Men's T20 Cricket World Cup, which is a tournament for a shorter version of the cricket game, 20 overs per side versus 50 overs per side, and the same type of tournament that was held in Barbados in 2010 at the said Kensington Oval. In 2003, the Cricket Authority, headed by the BCA, the Barbados Cricket Association, felt that Barbados had the human and technical resources, as well as the necessary infrastructure, to play a principal role in the successful hosting of the ICC Men's Cricket World Cup tournament that was scheduled to be played in the Caribbean in 2007. This position was strengthened by the vision encompassed in the government's National Strategic Plan of moving the country to a developed economy status and offer the government an opportunity to prove Barbados's capacity to operate at world-class levels. As a secondary impetus, it would offer the government an initiative that could be a step forward towards the vision of regional integration and implementation of the Caribbean Single Market and Economy, the CSME, since the single tournament was to be played across many of the Caribbean nations in the CSME space. However, there was also the realization that if the occasion was not taken to invest in the renovation of Kensington Oval or the development of another cricket venue, then Barbados would likely find itself not being able to compete for future international cricket matches with the other Caribbean nations who would have upgraded their facilities for the event. And therefore, the implications for potential revenue loss in the years ahead did not go unnoticed. So the Barbados Cricket Association met with representatives of the government and submitted a preliminary proposal for the redevelopment of Kensington Oval. The government representatives endorsed the proposal and asked the BCA to develop the proposal further for a presentation in April 2003 to a cabinet subcommittee, which would be chaired by the then Prime Minister, the late Right Honourable Boyd Arthur. That proposal included an expanded concept for the redevelopment of Kensington Oval and an outline of how Barbados should approach and could benefit from participation in the event. After seeing the presentation, Prime Minister Arthur made it clear that the government was fully supportive of hosting the Cricket World Cup and considered the event critical to the ongoing development of Barbados. In his words of endorsement, he exhorted the planning team to go for gold. To carry out the task, in September 2003, a single-purpose private company called World Cup Barbados, Inc. was established, with Barbados Tourism Investment, Inc. representing the government of Barbados and the Barbados Cricket Association as the shareholders. The company ratified the actions previously taken by the BCA and commenced the process, among other things, to oversee the redevelopment of Kensington Oval and its environs for the ICC Cricket World Cup 2007 and beyond. World Cup Barbados established a board of directors under the chairmanship of Mr. Krista Kearies and set about determining the best senior management for the job under CEO, the late Stephen Alley, to provide guidance and direction for the event preparation. It established multiple committees of the board to deal with all the specific areas needed for hosting the event, including the redevelopment of Kensington Oval. It was during that period of recruitment that I was approached as to whether I would consider being the project manager for the development of the facilities, and was interviewed by one of those committees of the board who ultimately determined that I was suited for the task and recommended me for the position. By then, the Barbados Cricket Association had been introduced to Arup Associates, a London-based multidisciplinary design firm with an established record in constructing sports media, including the Manchester Stadium, which was the venue for the 2002 Commonwealth Games. World Cup Barbados endorsed the selection of Arup and engaged their services to develop the concept design. Heading the Arup team was a Kenyan-born, British-educated architect and urban planner of Indian descent named Dipesh Patel. Arup's concept was based on retaining Kensington Oval as the venue, rather than taking the easier path of least resistance by developing a greenfield site. Kensington Oval is a cricket ground steeped in Barbadian and West Indian cricket culture and history from 1882, when it was no more than a 4-acre pasture leased to the Pickwick Cricket Club for a penny a year by the then owner of the Kensington Plantation. It remained the home of the Pickwick Cricket Club until 2004, when its last lease expired. Some of that history included Barbados playing and winning its first match against a touring side from England in 1895, a West Indian team playing and losing to the first touring MCC team in 1911, hosting its first test match in 1930, West Indies versus England, hosting its first one-day international in 1985, West Indies versus New Zealand, and being the ground where the West Indies cricket team had a winning streak of 12 consecutive test matches between 1978 and 1993. By retaining the Kensington Oval site as the premier cricket ground in Barbados and upgrading it, it was hoped that this would lead to a regeneration of the Fontebelle Business District, which was starting to show signs of degradation. The decision was supported by other historical data, which showed that greenfield sites, although easier and cheaper to construct, did not always generate the local interest needed to cause other businesses to develop around it. I think there's some evidence of that having happened in other Caribbean countries, which went the greenfield. Arup's assessment of Kensington Oval was that most of the spectator accommodation did not meet acceptable international standards. There were inadequacies such as restricted circulation, limited concourse provision, obstructed views, and inadequate sight lines, and generally unsatisfactory sanitary facilities. In addition, there was an inadequate amount of numbered individual seats, as many of the stands had benches, an absence of turnstiles, and the total spectator capacity of around 14,000 was below the International Cricket Council's requirement of a 27,000 spectator capacity stadium for venues seeking to host the final of the tournament. The playing area was irregular and also below the ICC's minimum requirement of 140 yards from boundary to boundary square of the pitch, with a further 5 yards distance between the rope to the perimeter. The number of available pitches in the middle was not enough, and there was a requirement that no practice pitches were to be located on the playing area in order to prevent injury to players and to ensure every batter's stroke got equal worth. Arup, however, liked the look of the cricket ground with its individual stands of varying designs and modulating heights, And it recommended that WCB not go the route of a monolithic stadium with spectator accommodation under a single roof or a series of roofs of similar design. This recommendation was accepted as it would maintain some of the character of the ground and allowed for retention of any of the existing buildings that may be suitable and met code. Meanwhile, a bidding process was set up by the West Indies Cricket Board and the ICC to determine which countries would host tournament matches. The matches were divided into 8 packages, and Barbados determined that the most beneficial packages to Barbados in terms of spectator and commercial interests were the black package of 6 Super 8 matches in the final, and the blue package of the first round matches that included the England team and 1 semi-final. Barbados therefore submitted its bid for matches on the basis of being successful with either package, and in July 2004 was awarded the black package, with the matches slated for between the 11th and 28th of April 2007. Kendall will now share some slides, which I will go through. Right, the first slide, Kensington Oval at the time looked like this. An irregular shaped field with 11 stands, including a temporary one erected for the Pakistan versus West Indies Test Series taking place at the time this aerial photograph was taken. And the design concept that was being developed to cater for the black package of World Cup matches required the Oval's almost complete demolition, including the demolition of the media center and the players' pavilion, which were unfortunately of not too distant vintage. But it was recognized that the players and the media accommodations were not of adequate capacity and to the highest standard. And therefore, the fallout that could be from that could be detrimental to the overall success of the venture. Despite some inadequacies, the only stands to be retained were the Hall and Griffith stand to the northwest of the playing area and the Mitchie Hewitt stand to the southwest of the playing area. Every stand in between those 2 stands and beyond would be demolished. Next slide. In order to enlarge and create a symmetrical playing area and create adequate buffer and concourse spaces around, it was determined that Kensington Oval, formerly bounded on the northern half by Pickwick Gap, would have to expand permanently on that northern half to include the area bounded by the red line, as far west as Fontebelle Road, as far north as President Kennedy Drive, and as far east as 10th Avenue, New Orleans, and almost to 4th Avenue, Pickwick Gap. This meant the abandonment of part of Pickwick Gap, which would cease to be a connecting public road between Westbury Road and Fontebelle. It also meant the acquisition of commercial properties on Fontebelle and President Kennedy Drive, the demolition of a listed building named Woodville on Fontebelle, and the relocation of 24 houses on Pickwick Gap to Barbary Garden. It also meant the expansion temporarily onto commercial properties to the southeast to accommodate temporary spectator accommodation and hospitality facilities. The next slide shows the extent of the demolitions in progress. The houses are gone. The field is being stripped of its topsoil. The rear houses and stands are in various stages of demolition. Next slide. The new legacy footprint would now sit on 12.5 acres of land with a legacy permanent seating capacity of around 12,000, with an eastern open area that could be utilized for party stands and temporary bleachers to fluctuate the capacity as needed. There'll be 9 permanent buildings starting from the south and going clockwise, 1, the rebuilt media center, renamed the Coppin, Crozier, and Shorrock Media Center. 2, the retained and extended Mitchie Hewitt stand, renamed the Hewitt and Innes stand, which would now include accommodation for medical personnel and volunteers, as well as a venue operations center. 3, the rebuilt Greenwich and Hames stand, now to be relocated to where previously stood the Kensington and Eric Innes stands. 4, the retained but extended Hall and Griffith stand, which would now include a press conference room. 5, the rebuilt Players Pavilion, the Garfield Suburbs Pavilion. 6, the rebuilt World Weeks and Walcott stand, now to be relocated to where previously stood the Challoner and the Pickwick Pavilion. And outside the Arc, the Cricket Museum to the northeast of the World Weeks and Walcott stand, an indoor nets building to the northeast of the said stand, and a food and beverage vendors facility to the west of the Greenwich and Haines and Hall and Griffith stands. For Cricket World Cup, the temporary accommodation would include a spectator stand to the east of the ground of 15,000 total seating capacity, and hospitality areas off-site on a vacant property within walking distance to the south of the Oval. In order to accommodate the temporary spectator stand with its innovative floating roof, and since all the matches were to be daytime matches not utilizing artificial lighting, the decision was taken to defer installation of the floodlights and the permanent electronic scoreboard until after the World Cup. The playing field would now be resized and relayed, utilizing a free drainage technique of layers of graded stones, gravels, and sands, some of which were to be imported from St. Vincent, to enable the installation of a modern irrigation system and an efficient drainage system to reduce long delays in play during matches after showers of rain. All of this was described to the ICC venue assessment team, who were to determine the allocation of match packages through audiovisual presentations prepared by Arab and the team. Next slide. Such that when the venue assessment team visited Kensington Oval prior to the award of packages in May of 2004, instead of looking at the oval as it was, they were ushered into a tent flanked with black curtains and located on the center of the playing field, in which were large screen images of Kensington Oval all around, as it would be in 2007, as well as a scale model of the new ground. Next slide. I cannot but stress how important these video images and the scale model were in explaining the concept to stakeholders, especially those who could not read architectural plans. You can pause the screen share now, Kenton. Having achieved the lucrative black package of matches with the greatest commercial benefit for Barbados, the task ahead now was to complete the designs, have them evaluated to ensure that they met the budget, and to prepare tender documents. It was always understood that as much as possible, the gain from the World Cup must be filtered as far as possible into the local economy. So with Arup as the concept and design development lead architect, and with the intention of sharing the work as widely as possible with local designers and other consultants, 15 local architectural, civil and structural engineering, services engineering, landscape design, and quantity surveying firms were selected and divided into 3 teams to develop the designs and prepare tender documents for the project. This process involved initial visits by the local team to the London offices of Arup, followed by reciprocal visits, and ultimately the establishment of a small Arup team in the project office on site. The formal notice to proceed with the project was received at the end of September 2004, and WCB set about utilizing a procurement strategy which was consistent with that of the governments. At that time, the local construction industry was in a relatively busy state, and initial indications were that the large local general contractor firms were unlikely to be interested in the project. Initially, it was decided, rather than seek an international general contractor, to engage as many as possible of the local small and medium-sized construction firms directly by breaking the project into packages of buildings and building components. And WCB would engage a construction management firm to manage the package contractors for the buildings, while the building components will be managed by WCB. A tender notice for construction management firms was issued, and 5 tenders were received from regional and international contractors, none from any local company. Larsen and Toubro General Contracting Services Limited, India's largest engineering and construction company, were the successful bidder, and they were awarded the construction management contract. However, it was later decided that to mitigate World Cup Barbados' risk, it might be better to negotiate and convert the construction management contract into a hybrid management stroke general contract, whereby the package building contractors will be managed by Larsen and Toubro as package subcontractors. And in the event of any failure on the part of any package subcontractor, Larsen and Toubro could take over and complete the building package as general contractor. Overall, through open and selective tendering, there were 8 building package subcontractors engaged on the project and 17 direct contract packages, together providing close to 1.5 million man-hours of work, with a peak workforce of 536 workers. The majority of these package subcontractors and the labor force were from Barbados. At that time, there was also a sizable contingent of capable Guyanese artisans and labor on the island, and their services were also fully utilized. The official start date for construction was 5th June 2005. This was determined by the completion of the last cricket match to be played at the Old Oval, the West Indies versus Pakistan Test match. And on the 31st of May 2005, in a nighttime closing ceremony for the Oval, the officials of the BCA handed over the keys of Kensington Oval to the officials of World Cup Barbados, who then turned off the lights in every stand, one by one, symbolizing the end of an era. The host venue agreement obligated countries to hand over their completed stadia to the ICC by the 31st of October 2006, which in effect gave a construction period of only 17 months. This, in spite of the fact that no cricket match was scheduled for the Barbados venue until the 11th of April 2007, almost 5.5 months later. The argument put forward was that there was significant overlay temporary work to be done by ICC after handover, but I could not fathom why it was not possible to do this overlay work simultaneously with the finishing of the construction. This rush to complete, coupled with a construction industry in full boom, contributed to increases in the project cost, and value engineering exercises became necessary, as well as additional funding. As a result, the museum building was eliminated, and the decision taken that any future museum should be accommodated at Herbert House on Fontebelle, earmarked for use by the cricket legends of Barbados. The indoor nets building was eliminated, and the decision taken to indefinitely defer development of an indoor nets facility and to locate it in the former Armstrong Agency's warehouse, which was being utilized at the time as the project office. The fitting out of the hospitality suites in the Greenwich and Haynes stand to serve as hostel accommodation for future visiting cricket teams on training tours was put on hold, and the helium-filled floating roof to cover the temporary stands was shelved for a more conventional partial roof cover. Delays in construction were encountered due in part to more piling than expected being required for the Royal Weeks and Walcott stand, which, being the largest structure at the Oval, was a building on the critical path. Difficulty in effecting a full double shift system due to manpower shortages, and difficulty in building and erecting the curved roof structures to both the Greenwich and Haynes stand and the Royal Weeks and Walcott stand. Fainter hearts will succumb to the relentless pressure and have redesigned the roofs to simpler structures, but that would have been a serious aesthetic and iconic mistake in my view. Despite WCB's repeated assurances that delivery of a fully functional stadium for the commencement of the tournament would not be jeopardized, the ICC did issue a formal warning to WCB of breach of the host venue agreement obligations and rated the venue's development status as a yellow, the second lowest of 4 grades, which was to be interpreted to mean caution, unsatisfactory progress, special attention required. I recall on one site visit, the ICC construction's experts told me that they did not share my confidence in achieving completion for the games to take place, but they were at least willing to give me the benefit of the doubt. Nevertheless, practical completion of the Oval was achieved on the 15th of February 2007, 20.5 months after the start and 2 months ahead of the first game. Barbadians not involved in its construction had their opportunity to enter the new Kensington Oval for the official opening on the 17th of February 2007, which featured a T20 cricket match between a vintage West Indies 11 led by Sir Vivian Richards and a World 11 led by Alex Stewart. It was attended by 12,500 spectators and was used to test the stadium for its readiness. Full completion, including overlay, was achieved on the 31st of March 2007. And on the 4th of April, the ICC conducted its final inspection, and after a lengthy tour, announced that Kensington Oval was rated green, the highest rating possible. And I am told the only ground in the Caribbean to be granted that rating on inspection without the need for remedial work. The 7 tournament games came off without any venue hitches, and the Oval and its components performed as expected. The maximum number of spectators accommodated was 22,500 at the match between West Indies and England, and the maximum number of media, 360 at the final. After the World Cup, a number of persons universally acknowledged as being able to speak with authority on matters related to cricket shared their views. Nasser Hussain, a former cricketer and then commentator, said, and I quote, "Kensington Oval gets 10 out of 10 on my score sheet. It is the perfect place for the final of the great international tournament," unquote. So Ian Botham, former cricketer and then commentator, said, and I quote, "This is an extremely impressive stadium which can rank with the best anywhere in the world," unquote. Christopher Martin Jenkins, journalist and commentator, said, and I quote, "This is a magnificent cricket ground, somewhere worth visiting to watch and enjoy cricket of the highest level," unquote. Surveys conducted by the National Initiative for Service Excellence among spectators during the matches revealed that 90% were impressed with the design and facilities at the Oval, and among the media, this increased to 93%. Among the players, 93% gave high scores for the quality of the accommodation, 90% for the design and facilities in the Players' Pavilion, and 88% for the ambience and comfort of the pavilion. Dipesh Patel of Arup went on to win Sports Architect of the Year in Britain's Building Design Awards of 2007, based on including Kensington Oval in his portfolio of projects, with the judges noting that, and I quote, "Kensington Oval has become a modern icon of Bridgetown," unquote. Kensington Oval also won the Emirates Glass Leaf Award 2007 in the structural design category. The World Weeks in Walcott Stand, competing against structures such as the O2 Arena in London and Heathrow's Terminal 5, receive a commendation in the 2008 Structural Steel Design Awards for steelwork, highlighting a successful international cooperation between Tube Workers Limited of UK and Structural Systems Limited of Barbados, with the judges stating, and I quote, "This is a good planning response to updating this hallowed cricket ground. It gives an enhanced sense of place in the town, whilst retaining much of the former character. The design copes well with the many issues of climate, function, and economy. The challenges were well answered, and the international work handled successfully," unquote. I'll now share some aspects of the redevelopment redeveloped Kensington Oval, which I think are worthy of mention. Kenton, if you can share the screen again. Right, this is the cantilevered roof of the Greenwich and Haynes stand. Prior to my involvement with this project, I would go to Kensington Oval to watch cricket matches and return home with a headache. And I'm sure many of you may have also experienced this and attribute it to the alcoholic consumption or the performance of the team. It may not have been. It may have been due to the fact that the stands at the Oval were very dark compared to the playing field, which was extremely bright. As you watch the match and converse with patrons next to you in the stand, your eyes were constantly subjected to contrasting bright and dark. And the constant dilation and contraction of your pupils caused eye strain that led to the headache. To mitigate this, the cantilevered roofs at the Oval were covered in translucent sheeting with a translucent ceiling beneath to filter natural light into the spectator areas, making the area brighter and reducing eye strain. Next slide. This is the iconic World Weeks and Walcott stand taken from across the field. In the foreground, between the spectators and the field, you will see a dark green arc. This was a temporary installation called the moat, and it was a barrier to prevent spectators running onto the field. It's a lightweight metal frame on which was draped a net, which would slow an intruder sufficiently to allow security guards to intercept his or her ingress onto the field of play. It was used in the previous World Cup held in South Africa and proved effective and is aesthetically more pleasing than the chain link fences you see around some international grounds. But beneath that temporary moat is a permanent moat, a series of semi-cylindrical underground tanks that surround the field and which can store up to 300,000 gallons of rainwater collected from the underfield drainage system and allowing the playing area to still drain quickly despite the closeness of the water table to the surface at Kensington Oval. It too has also proven very effective. Next slide. This shows the natural ventilation system included in the design of the World Weeks and Walcott stand. Almost horizontal louvers allow air in, but are wide enough to capture rain and guide it back out of the building. And so do the overlapping cones of the cheek cladding, which allow airflow, but like the louvers, restrict rain ingress. Next slide. This shows the translucent ceiling in the World Weeks and Walcott stand, as well as the wonky columns that had a bit of whimsy, but probably were a nightmare for the structural engineers. It also shows the start of how the front cone, which connects the camera gantry to the 25-meter cantilevered canopy above, is cut back to form a leading edge, which is defined by intersecting the cone geometry with that of a cylinder running perpendicular to it. To permit every spectator, even the one high in the uppermost, most extreme westerly or easterly seat, to see the boundary of the field of play. However, I'm showing it to also highlight the random arrangement of the three colors that make up the mottled effect of the seating. This was deliberate and creates, when viewed on television, the illusionary effect of a full stadium, even when that is not the case. Next slide. This shows the features already mentioned, the mottled seating, colors, the cone geometry. But I included to mention the use of the light gray and off-white color scheme for the oval, which was deliberate so as not to clash with the event branding and to allow the bright colors of the branding to pop on television and in photographs. Next slide. This shows the West Concourse designed in an ever-widening pattern to accommodate the increasing number of persons spilling out of the vomitories in the event of an emergency. Next slide. This ensures that there is no creation of a crush and the resultant trampling that would occur otherwise, something that has occurred in previous stadium disasters. And finally, the image of greatness, personified in national hero, the Right Excellent and Honorable Sir Garfield Sobers, as the exclamation mark on Kensington Oval. This statue was commissioned before the redevelopment and was residing at the roundabout close to the gymnasium that bears his name. However, it was felt that it would be more appropriate to relocate it to the plaza at the entrance to the Oval, close to the Players Pavilion that also bears his name. With his agreement, so said, so done. You can pause the screen share. In addition to the Kensington Oval redevelopment, the Cricket World Cup 2007 spawned other developmental works, most notably at the 3Ws Oval at the Cave Hill campus of the University of West Indies, where warm-up games were played and practice sessions were held. There was also the renovation of Herbert House, which served as a ticket center and is now the home of the cricket legends of Barbados. So what is the legacy? As has been proven, the investment in 2007 in the permanent redevelopment of Kensington Oval into a world-class venue for world-class cricket was not only for the Cricket World Cup 2007, but for beyond. And that investment carried over into 2010 when the Cricket T20 World Cup was held there, and now, 17 years later, carries over when the Cricket T20 World Cup will be repeated there. And I have no doubt that it will continue to be carried over in the future, providing a world-class venue for world-class events with an infrastructure that, at short order, with some upgrade, enhancement, and temporary expansion, can still be used to host future world-class cricket tournaments and other events. The investment in 2007, calculated at 160 million inclusive of all facilities, was reported to have generated tourism revenue of close to 250 million, excluding any advertising and promotional value of marketing, which the Barbados brand would have received by the exposure. So when you added an additional 2 World Cups into the mix, the legacy benefit and the return on the investment is clear. It was, for me, a satisfying project, and I hope that members of the BAP and others who were involved feel that satisfaction, and that there was some, even if not financial, then intellectual gain generated by their participation in the process of redeveloping Kensington Oval, and that in the songwriting genius of Malik's Piccadilly Rock 2006 Calypso, we were all fuck up. Thank you.
Hey, Miles, thank you so much for that presentation. And I think it's a story that has long been needed to be told. I'm not aware of any other presentations on the Oval since its completion. If there were, unfortunately, I wasn't aware of it. But certainly it is a story that needs to be told. And we are happy this evening to give voice to that story and to explore the legacy as you have alluded to. So I'd like to open the forum to some questions at this stage. Just a reminder, before we do the questions, you can either raise your hand and I will call upon you to answer your question directly to Miles, or you can put your question in the chat and I can deliver that question to Miles. So I have a question from Julia Curtin. Go ahead, Julia.
Hello, good afternoon. I just wanted to ask a little bit about the concept, the design concept. I was wondering I don't know if you already mentioned it. I was trying to sign in and do some other things there, but did you speak about what gave the shape and the form? What was the idea behind that for the image, for the main image that has the most irregular shape and form? Was there something about the aerodynamics or something in the engineering, or simply both aesthetics and that? Over.
Thanks. Yeah, as I mentioned, the concept designer liked the modulation of the old dome, and therefore tried to carry that forward into having each stand have its own look. Previously, at Kensington, all the stands had a straightforward gable roof. And he tried to move away from that and create shapes that, had a different look to them. I not necessarily know what drove him to particular looks. I mean, the World Weeks and Walcott stand, when he first showed it, had square edges. It didn't have the curves. But I think once they developed the Greenwich handstand with some curves in it, I think you probably felt a few more curves should go into it. And I don't think anybody would deny that look on the Warwickson Walcott stand. Although some people have said it's very similar to the media center look at Lord's, but I think it surpasses that by a long way. It was kind of like whether he was trying to borrow from that image as well.
Any follow-up on that, Julia, or that's it?
That's it for now. Thank you.
All right. Andrew, please unmute, answer your question.
Good afternoon, Miles. Thanks for such a fantastic presentation. You know, we do projects often around the Caribbean and Barbados included, and we never take time to we never take time to document, you know, and record what was done. And I salute you this afternoon for doing that with the Kensington Oval project. We just finish projects, we move on, and we just don't seem to look back, you know. But I want to make, as the engineer responsible for the drainage at Kensington Oval, I noticed you referred to them as tanks around the perimeter, around the boundary. You know, these were not really tanks. These were hyperbolic HDPE arches for storage of rainwater. Yeah, that was correct, but they're not really tanks. And there were 269 to be exact. And all of the roof drainage on the buildings, including the field drainage, is collected into these storm chambers and infiltrated into the ground. Now, that helps to build the groundwater because we also built a new well to abstract groundwater for irrigation. So we were taking all the water off the roofs and putting it into the ground to improve the aquifer in that area, the lens, but also then abstracting water for irrigation. So that's to add a little more meat to what you. In fact, I have a lovely picture of which I could give you to add to your collection of the 269 storm chambers laid in the ground before they were backfilled, to properly represent what was done. But I have a challenging question. I seem to recall there was no lighting, correct? There was no light towers for the playing field. I remember sitting there watching the final and that fiasco when they had, we had to finish the final in the dark. You remember that?
Well, I remember it because I was the venue manager for all the matches.
Yeah.
As I explained, the decision not to put in the light towers was because the playing conditions for the matches was daytime matches, and you were not allowed to play on the illumination. Those were the playing conditions at the time. And also, putting in the light towers would have seriously impacted the huge temporary stand that was erected on the eastern side of the ground,
right,
to bring capacity up to 27,000 people. So on that basis, the decision was taken. As it turned out, it became a hot talking point because nothing to do with the planning and so on. It is the fact that the rain fell on the day of the final, which delayed the match. And there was an additional day allowed that the match could have carried forward to the next day. But the umpires at the time determined that they would continue the match to get it over with because there was not much left for the match to continue. And therefore, it sneaked into twilight and beyond.
Yeah.
And therefore, people started to complain that, the match was played in total darkness, which is true.
Yes.
But that is a reflection of what transpired at that point in time. And really and truly what should have happened was that the match should have carried over into the next day. Now that obviously had implications in terms of teams and, I think the team, they also consulted the teams and teams said they'd prefer to finish the match the same day. But those are extraneous contingencies that, at that point in time, we never envisaged would have occurred.
And then one other point I would just mention, the entire sewer system was constructed for the entire Kensington Oval complex to allow it to be connected to the Bridgetown sewer treatment plant, which was quite an undertaking, because when the sewage plant and the Bridgetown system was built, it was not foreseen at that time that this would happen at Kensington Oval. So some gymnastics had to be done to effectively sewer Kensington for the World Cup. Anyhow, that's my comments. Congratulations, a great presentation.
Thanks. And just to respond to your point about not documenting what happens in projects, which I share your view. But for Kensington Oval, actually, World Cup Barbados prepared what they call Barbados Small Island Big Dreams, a booklet which covered not just Kensington Oval development, but all of the things that went into getting Barbados ready for the World Cup, which I'm sure the current planners of this current World Cup would probably have referred to ensure that, you know, you didn't recreate the wheel, or that you didn't make the same mistakes over again. So some of the information that I included in my presentation came from that booklet, because it had recorded things like man hours and spent and so on. Right. So there is a I don't know where you would get it from. I do have a personal copy, but I don't know where you get it from. But there is a document that chronicles Barbados's preparation for Cricket World Cup 2007.
That document should be published.
I believe it was published, but I don't. As I said, I don't know. It certainly has a barcode on my number. It says costing me $32.99. So it is there, but I don't know how. If it's probably out of print, and I don't know where.
It might have been a limited edition print, and it may be out of print. But I guess it's something we can investigate.
Okay,
thanks, Andrew, for your questions. Now, Miles, we've talked about legacy, and we've also talked about this amazing project and some of the unique features that would have been part of the project. Andrew mentioned the drainage, which a lot of persons after 2007 have complimented the Oval on how quickly and how effectively the drainage on that field is, and how well it works. And that's a constant compliment that we hear about the Oval with international matches since then. You mentioned something that I wasn't aware of about a helium-filled roof that was proposed for the temporary stands. Could you give us a little idea of what that might have been had that part of the project gone ahead?
Yeah, in one of the earlier slides, you would have seen what I was referring to in the artist's impression of what the Oval would look like. So the entire eastern side of the ground had this arcing temporary stand in the original concept. And there was a great hue and cry about having uncovered seating. There you go. Well, having uncovered seating. So you see the arc to the right of the picture. And it was felt that we could not have daytime matches, which would be running from, 9 o'clock in the morning through to 6 o'clock in the evening, with people sitting in the sun. This is not something that West Indians are accustomed to doing, and it's not something that is recommended, because the sun in West Indies is very, very hot. So the intent was to cover that with a floating roof. And the idea was that you see the spines would be helium-filled like balloons, connected by a draping cover, and these would be restrained to the ground. It's not something that was done anywhere before. It was just an idea that Arab were pursuing, and we went as far as to finding out how much helium was required and whether we could get that here and what would happen if there was a leak and all of that sort of stuff. But when money set in, we had to abandon the idea and revert then to a more traditional gable roof, which didn't quite cover all of the stand, but which at the time made that stand the largest temporary stand with a partial cover ever erected anywhere in the world. So that was the concept for the helium-filled floating roof that should be restrained to cover the stand. But
Miles, are you aware if the concept have been used since then?
I am not aware, and we certainly didn't have the money to explore it further. So I'm very sorry about that.
Okay, so you just introduced now another topic, the temporary stands. Now, when I went to the workshop, I was in the temporary stands, and I must say they were impressive. Could you give us some idea of the engineering and the setting up of those temporary stands and how long it took, etc.?
It didn't take long. There are companies around the world who specialize in this. I mean, temporary stands are a unique feature of large events. And prior to World Cup, a team of us went to the Super Bowl, which was being held in Florida at the time, either Florida or Fort Lauderdale. I'm not remember which one, but somewhere in Miami, and to see how they prepare. So getting personnel to bring in temporary stands is not unusual for large events. It was unusual for us, but it's not unusual for large events. And in fact, Barbados tendered for that internationally. And the company that was awarded the stand, Newsley out of Switzerland, I believe. That's the only stand they did in the Caribbean. The other temporary stands in the Caribbean were done by a French company under a joint arrangement where all the stands were done by the same person. But as all we were required to do was prepare a hard surface on which the stands would sit, level surface, and then they came in and I don't know, if it took 3 weeks, that was probably long. It was put up in rapid time, taken down in rapid time and shipped back to wherever it came from. It was quite a scary feature for venue manager, me, because when those spectators got in there and started stamping their feet on the metal platform, that made quite a sound. But it survived all of those 15,000, 30,000 feet. So clearly, Newsley knew what they were doing.
Yeah, fantastic. Fantastic. Are there any other questions from the audience, please? Do take this opportunity to answer your questions. We won't want this opportunity to pass. If there's anyone that has any questions, please put your hand up or drop the question in the chat. Now, Miles, you mentioned from a construction project management point of view that the project was broken into packages. Could you give us some idea of the wisdom behind that concept and the benefits that it proved later down the project?
Yeah, well, the wisdom was to try and cover the gap in construction availability. As I said, the industry was in a bit of a boom. The large contractors had their hands full or did not want to get involved with this, which obviously carried a lot of risk. But we wanted to as I said, share the pie locally as much as possible. So the idea of using smaller contractors who would not necessarily be able to do the whole stadium, whole oval, but they could do one building. So, you know, there was a contractor for every stand, and it was a matter then of managing them. And then the components that were unique were not unique to the stand and common to stand, like seating. We managed as a separate package with a company out of Australia who came in then and just putting all the seats in all of the stands. So it was a way of countering a shortage of manpower, and it was a way of engaging medium-sized and smaller contractors in Barbados. One of the things I would like to mention, which was one of the disappointments really, as I was talking about the temporary stand that came to mind, is that there wasn't more cooperation between the islands in what they were doing. I think the whole process of bidding at the beginning set us against each other rather than with each other. And therefore, things like seating, which were common to all stadiums, we could probably have got a better deal if we had had like a joint arrangement. And there were other common things that would apply. I mean, there was a certain amount of it with the overlay, but that was one of my disappointments. And it was very difficult to get any information out of any other territory, the team building their stadium as to what they were doing or how did they overcome some particular problem. That is my only regret about it.
Before I let Christian ask his question, was there a postmortem done on the building of stadia throughout the region where persons had that opportunity to feed in that information, or that never occurred?
No, that never occurred. Once the stadium were done, everybody slapped their hands together and ran. So there wasn't that postmortem on overall construction of stadia. Again, I mean, you can learn so much by hearing how people have solved problems, but a lot of times people don't have the inclination, the time to put into that. They're looking for their next project and move on.
Thanks for that, Miles. Christian, go ahead and answer your question, please.
Thanks, Vincent, and thank you, Miles. That was quite a walk down memory lane. I'd forgotten some of those things. So when we did it, I mean, it was a very complex stadium, actually, particularly with respect to the concourse circulation that you spoke of and the emergency egress, related emergency egress. So my question really just is do you know if there's been any continuity between what is being done now in terms of the team and the people that are working there now and what we did back in 2007, that some of this stuff is being carried forward?
I have been consulted on a few occasions, more to do with things like lights and not site screens, video screens, which have been changed. But I mean, and I will try and get down there tomorrow when it's open house. But from my observation, pretty much the permanent structures that we would have put up in 2007 are pretty much intact and being reused. And what they have done, other than necessary improvements to sanitary and other accommodations, and the temporary works and the lights, which have obviously 17 years on since we installed those with a 10-year warranty, were no longer relevant. And I think ICC has a higher standard of illumination required anyhow in today's world, with more use of television and the Hawkeyes and these sorts of matters. So I don't think there is, said, much change to the permanent infrastructure. It's more refurbishment and more of the temporary stuff that is getting the attention right now.
Okay, thanks.
Christian, any follow-up, or that's it?
That's all, thanks.
Okay. All right, I have a question from Hisham. He says, thank you for the presentation, Mr. Weeks. Bit noisy where I am. I have two questions. Number one, why were the light poles changed? And number two, are structural inspections, tests, or checks for the 3W stand done periodically? It is a unique structure design, and in today's world, this is a requirement, not here as far as I'm aware. So, Miles?
I can't answer either question definitively because I said I'm not involved in the current management of Kensington Oval or in the upgrades that they're doing at the moment. But the lights, we had installed halogen lights back in 2007, maybe, I think it was still 2000, maybe 2008, which had a 10-year warranty. What they're installing now are LED lights, which are more energy efficient. And also, as I said, the ICC has a higher illumination level required. In fact, it was thought that they would need to install 6 pylons rather than 4. The challenge of installing 6 pylons, you can probably get the 5th one in on the east side, but on the western side, that would be practically impossible because you would then have to get up and over the Greenwich and Haynes stand, whereas the current pylons went between that stand and the adjacent stands. So I think ultimately there were questions asked of me of that early in the year, but I think they obviously ultimately decided that they could provide the illumination from the 4 pylons, which are new pylons. I mean, I don't think anybody uses the same pylons. There are obviously different companies involved, so they would want to use their own pylons. But I don't know whether they're. I would assume that they're attached to the same foundations that were there before, because in fact we actually put in the foundations to the western pylons even before the stadium was finished. So that was a bit of foresight needed because you wouldn't be able to go back in there and dig up for foundations afterwards. And the second question was to whether or not the structures are inspected. I don't know. Following the completion of Cricket World Cup, because particularly the structures on the World Weeks and Walcott stand were pushed through at the end, we did have an engineering firm go back in and double check that all of the requisite bolts and everything were in place, just to double check, because we recognize that, you know, that's a serious problem there if either one of those cheeks were not properly connected. But I do not know, as I said, what has transpired since. All of the documentation and manuals and requirements for Kensington Oval were left at Kensington Oval for the maintenance and management teams to refer to. But I cannot say specifically whether or not they carry out periodic checks on the structures.
Okay, Christian, another question from you?
Yeah, sorry, Miles, you made reference to an open day tomorrow, and I'm sorry, I'm disconnected from life these days. What's that all about? Is there something going on?
I was informed that the Prime Minister has requested an open day so that you can go and have a guided tour of the Oval tomorrow, starting at 1:30 p.m. So that you can see what they have done, and as she puts it, where the money has been spent.
Yeah. Okay, thanks for that. Now, yeah, we're gonna play that notice from the Prime Minister at the end of the session for those who might not be aware, and Christian, you'll get to see that in a quick moment. Miles, you had mentioned the technical challenges that presented in doing the Greenwich and Haynes stand. Obviously, when you look at the structure, there's not a straight wall in sight. The roof is curvilinear. It is not something typical that you would find in Barbados in terms of how that was constructed out of concrete. Can you give us a project manager's point of view on the challenges that particular structure presented to you, and how the local engineers and contractors were able to get around that?
My approach to project management was never to find the easiest way to do things. You know, I think that leads to kind of simplistic designs. It leads to repetition of designs. And as I said in my presentation, fainter hearts would have succumbed to the pressure and put up a simple gable roof. And in fact, I do recall one engineer asking me, why don't we just do that and be done with it, you know? But you would look at, if, you know, as I highlighted, the Oval went on to win multiple awards.
Miles, let's stick a pin there. Okay, Kenton, can you bring the image of the Greenwich and Haynes stand so that persons know which stand we're talking about? That's the really curvy one. Yeah, carry on, Miles.
And these I believe are important things and add to the culture of the facility. You don't get the chance to do that more than once, I believe, in your lifetime. So you should take the opportunity to do it. Now, as I said, Arup had a very experienced team in doing structures, and if you investigate a lot of the structures that Dipesh Patel puts his hands to, they're never straightforward. So I gave him full support in exploring his mind to creating structures that we could look at in the future and, you know, be happy to see. You mentioned the Greenwich and Haynes, but right, this
Yeah.
one.
Right.
If you look at the earlier slide, in fact, it wasn't as simple. This is a simplified version. If you look at the earlier slide, Kenton, if you go back, like, yeah, next one. Next one probably gives it better. Yeah, you could see, or go to the next one, the one before that. Yeah, you see like egg shapes. So originally and this was his original concepts, huh? So you see the like the 3Ws didn't have any cheeks on it. It was a square structure. Looking more like I think it's Trent Bridge, you're right. But the Kensington innings looked like fingernails. And those were oval panels that were supposed to be which had the translucent sheeting in there. But that was proving a little bit challenging. So what we ended up with was actually a simplified version of where he started. But as I said, I tried as much as possible to not shoot down the architect's design just for expediency's sake, because in my view, this was a once in a lifetime opportunity to build something that Barbados could be proud of and that would stand the test of time. And that even today you look at it and say, wow.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think the structures are unique, and it really has produced a facility that is internationally recognizable. What was your experience working with Arup? I mean, this is a company that have done fantastic structures across the world in terms of design and so on, and we had that opportunity to have them here, playing a major role in the redevelopment of Kensington in 2006, 2007. What was that experience like for you, Miles, professionally, and the local professionals who would have worked with them on this project?
It wasn't unique necessarily to me because I had just come off of working on Sandy Lane Hotel, redeveloping that and the Green Monkey Golf Course. So, and in fact, that was mainly with international consultants. So it was this Kensington Oval came at an opportune time in my career, and I did have the experience of working with international consultants before. So it wasn't a challenge for me, as I said, and my approach to project management was not necessarily to embrace the whole concept, and it wasn't, you know, we're just trying to put up, I'm a quantity surveyor, but we're not just trying to put up the quickest, cheapest structure that we can. We've done that before. You know, we're trying to put up something that is iconic, that stands out, that is instantly recognizable, as you say, as a feature of Barbados. And therefore, I think you had to give the designers a certain amount of leeway. Now, I think there was, you know, certain features that I think the local designers would like have shrugged at. You know, the wonky columns in the 3Ws in the stand. I mean, you know, I don't think that is something which I don't think people would ordinarily look at. It just creates additional structural issues, which, you know, why would you do that? But it creates something that people look at and say, I've never seen that before. And that is the kind of thing that I was searching for. I mean, I wasn't given any mandate to search for that, but, you know, seeing what are the stalking, I spent, you know, a lot of time with Depeche, working, and I'd worked with him actually before, because the temporary stand that was put up for the Pakistan-West Indies match was something that, you know, he had a hand in. So I had actually had, you know, a sort of first few steps with him there. So I knew where he was coming from. I understood where he was coming from, and I was willing to embrace that. And I think it's all for the good. And I think we need to, you know, allow designers, not just architects, but engineers, to be a little bit more expressive. I know it's always tied down to money, but the end of the day, what you get, you can never put a value on, because it will stand the test of time, as Kensington has, and I said, I would be surprised if they had to do any significant adjustment to the permanent infrastructure to bring it up to readiness for T20 World Cup in a week's time.
Okay, last opportunity for persons in our audience to ask questions as we begin to wrap up tonight's session. Miles, I've seen a recent trend, or probably not so recent, a trend where structures, monuments, buildings that are supposed to be iconic in nature, they tend to be rushed to the finish, as opposed to these projects being given the sort of time and understanding that perhaps they would be internationally. As an industry, and perhaps in speaking to our clients, how do we impress upon our clients for them to understand that if we want to create these iconic structures and buildings, that there's need for time for the development and an understanding of the time it takes for these things to happen? What are your thoughts around that?
That's often driven, as I said, back to money. I mean, Kensington Oval had a tight time frame. It was not, we didn't determine how many months we were going to get to build it because we wanted that. That was determined because there were commitments to international cricket, which had to be recognized. So we couldn't start before the end of the Pakistan Test series. In fact, there was a New Zealand series that was scheduled in between, and originally we started to look and see if we could do par, break for that, and do par. And ultimately, it proved not to be possible. So I had to say, well, I'm sorry, we can't accommodate that. You have to take that elsewhere. Once we start this, because of the level of demolition that is required, there's no way we can get back up a stadium in there. And also because it's a tight site. And if you've got 8 contractors working, you can't, get the field done, because they had to use the perimeter of the field as access for getting to the structures. It's only after that you could remove that and allow the field to be developed. And that, we create with a very creative idea of building a box and putting the pitches in. So the pitches could be prepared. The pitches were prepared in a box. Well, work was going on around putting in irrigation and the tanks that, well, let me call them tanks, that Andrew spoke about, and access to the stadium and so on. And I remember the pitch and field consultant berating me that this thing was not moving fast. I had to let him know that I'm not building a pitch and a field, I'm building a stadium. So everything has its place and everything has to be done. So the pitch will be ready. The field is going to take a bit longer, but it's important to get the pitch in so it settles down and all of that. So we actually built a box and built up the pitch in the middle of the field while the work around went on. So you had to find creative ideas. But I don't know how you get clients to buy into the idea. I don't think there's any blueprint on that. I think it depends on the client, depends on how much the client appreciates the architecture, that it's not just a place for me to carry out function, but that it has to exude image. And that's how you create things like London, because they have all these iconic places. But you don't create that by just thinking about function only. You have to allow, as I said, designers to have some creativity. But I don't know how, I don't have an answer for how you would convince all clients that this was necessary. As I said, the pressure to simplify was great. And I mean, there were some things that I just had to say, no, we're not doing. I suppose it requires a certain level of confidence in as I said, the ICC didn't have much confidence that we would get through, but you have to have a level of confidence in the people that you're working. And one of my approaches to project management was to walk that field. I didn't sit in the office, and speak to the actual workers. And there's nothing more satisfying to go in the evening at 5:30 and you see some men still working and they say, Mr. Weeks, we'll get it finished for you. Now, that's just words, but it means a lot to me as a project manager, because if the workers are interested, then there's not, those are the cogs that make the wheel turn. And therefore, it is important to understand that. And the other aspect of project management, which I think is important to mention, studies have been done which showed that significant amount of time is lost, or I don't know if it still is or was lost on projects because of clashes in design and not getting a resolution of that clash immediately. So the contractor says, I'm going to do this. He plans out his week. On Tuesday, he hits a snag. He has to now reprogram his whole workforce. That is money. That is time. One of the approaches I took was that if you have a problem, you come to me. If I can't get the architect or engineer to make the decision, I'll make one for you. Because you have to keep these cogs moving, and you cannot allow a project to slow down. And anybody who's done projects knows that everything looks as though it's never going to finish, and then suddenly you remove the scaffolding and suddenly it's there. But it's a process of building up. And you have to make sure that that momentum is kept all along, and you don't have contractors not knowing what they're next going to do. And that's one of the things I try to instill in Kensington.
Fantastic. So Miles, we can't not have a discussion on Kensington Oval and not share some aspect or some idea of the work that went into the field itself. You mentioned the pitch, and perhaps the need for consideration of drop-in pitches is probably something we need to start looking at in the Caribbean. But can you give us an idea of the type of work that went into the actual pitch itself, the outfield and so on, that lush outfield? And obviously that is what is the most important part, because if you don't have that, you don't have the cricket. So give us a quick idea on a quick go over of what was entailed in that, and if there were any major challenges before we close off.
There were two aspects to the field. One was the pitches, the playing pitches, and the other is the playing field itself. The pitches themselves, we left in the hands of the local curators. They know best what materials work, and that's essentially not a draining area. That's a lot of clays and whatnot that you need to build up. And ICC had developed a template for that. This is how a pitch should be built. I'm not 100% sure, that it applies all across the globe, but at least we had a template to work to. We did look at drop-in pitches, and there is provision, and we know we had a plan as to where that could happen. And that's why the space between the media center and the Mitchie Hewitt is so wide. Because the idea was that there is a vacant lot in Fontebelle, south of Kensington, where you could actually prepare these pitches, and then there would be a trolley that would bring them in through that space and move them on to the pitch. So that was part of the plan in case we went there. Drop-in pitches have had a varied history. Some people say they work, some people say they don't. I know that there are people in Australia who are looking at shipping them to the United States. So they may have developed the technology a bit better since in 17, 20 years. The other aspect was the outfield. Obviously the requirement is that you have a free draining outfield. You cannot have, in today's world, a shower rain and that's the end of the match. And that certainly doesn't help tournaments like the one-day tournaments and the T20 tournaments. So we had a consultant in from the UK who developed again, are layers of stone of varying sizes, ultimately finishing with sand. So that the water that falls on the field is able to drain through, but it doesn't clog the drainage because you have these intermix of varying size stones, gravels, and so on. Some of the sizes were not available in Barbados and were not of sufficient hardness. So we actually brought river stone from St. Vincent for one of the layers. And then in that layer, you then put in your drainage pipes to take the water to the perimeter and to replenish the groundwater, and you put in your irrigation system. So there were two parallel things working together, and that's why I say we could build the pitches in their own box, and then we could build the outfield, and also try to meet to the requirements in terms of slope. There were limits on how slope it could be. I know if you've ever watched cricket at Beausejour in St. Lucia, not putting them down, but if you're fielding on one boundary and you look across the field, you will see the other fielder at sort of waist height. Because the slope, they had attempted to drain the pitch by sloping it, as opposed to getting the water go through it, which is obviously a problem when you're having cricketers can't see quite what's happening with the ball on the other side, and then it comes over the pitch at them, and they have no clue where the person was. So there were, I mean, I don't think there was anything that wasn't a challenge because it was all new, and this was the first upgraded cricket venue in Barbados, but you have to learn how to understand the issue, how to work it through. I mean, the site screens. There are Venetian blinds that rotate black one side, white one side. I don't know that it's used anywhere else in the world, but it was the first time that the company that made them was using it as a site screen. But again, how can we achieve what we want to? I mean, there was even the thought of, how there are wrap vans now that you can see out, but you can't see in. If we could use that technology on the glass panes. So we looked at a lot of things. I mean, it was never easy coming to the solution that we ended up with. But it was always very exciting and very stimulating.
Miles, thank you so much for a stimulating discussion this evening. It's really set, I think, in our minds the platform for the stadium that we have there today, and we probably take for granted, not fully understanding the amount of work, planning, execution that went into that project. And as you said, the benefit 3 times over that we've had the opportunity to host finals at Kensington in Barbados. So I think the legacy certainly speaks for itself, and well done to you all those years ago on a project that was, as you said, time sensitive but well executed. So thank you, Miles, and thank you for agreeing for coming on this evening.
Thank you.